This podcast is powered by MIDA, the Maryland Initiative for Digital Accessibility. Find out more about MIDA on their website, mida.umd.edu. Hey, universe, you're listening to the inaugural podcast for Including Disability. Hey, Stephanie, how are you today?
I'm great, Alex. Thanks so much for being with me here today on this inaugural podcast.
Feel like we're going to say inaugural podcast a lot, so we could call it our inaugurapod.
I'm down for that.
Yeah,
Inaugurapod. No, can't say that.
inaugurapod.
Can't say it.
You know what? The worst part is we can't do that after this episode. So I think we have to get everything we can out of it for this one because you can only be inaugural once.
That's
So,
true. We may as well abuse the system while we can and abuse the listeners.
well, why don't we tell our listeners, since this is our inaugurapod, who we are?
That sounds like a really good idea. So, who are you, Alex?
Oh, well, my name is Alex, and I am the artistic director for Including Disability.
And I
Who are you,
guess that
Stephanie?
that makes me Stephanie. I'm actually the co-founder of the whole Jamboree Cheese Show party. That is the Including Disability Global Summit. Its companion anti-academic journal, and that's also called Including Disability because we are nothing if not creative. And yeah,
That's true.
so we've just been hanging out here.
And what you're going to listen to today is a conversation that Stephanie and I had with Casey Doherty, who is a disability justice initiative policy analyst at the Center for American Progress. So you're going to get to hear a great conversation between the three of us just in a few minutes. But we do have a couple of other people that support us with this podcast as we're getting started. And that is Elizabeth and Alex, who are kind of acting as our producers for this, right, Stephanie?
Producers, chaos coordinators, Panic and Party at the Disco, they do everything. So we'd love to hear from you, Elizabeth. Who are you?
I'm Elizabeth, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Maryland. I am working on a degree in information studies, and my focus within that incredibly broad area is accessibility in music archives. With the Including Disability folks, I'm also the director of strategic and creative operations.
Which makes for the literal best acronym ever, which is DISCO,
It's true.
because
I
it's
bring the
always a
disco
party.
party. hmm
And how about Alex? I know we have two Alexes, but other Alex, I guess.
Hello, hello. Who am I? That's a good question. I am a software developer, previous speech language pathologist, now in my software development accessibility era. And I've been with Including Disability since 2020, which is wild. It feels like just yesterday, but also a year, like years, which is great. And I am, what's my title with Director of Event Logistics, with a dash of the website in there. So yeah, that's me. Bye, everyone.
See, I don't know if there's a an amount of people you need to have before you can have a jamboree, but as you can hear, there's certainly more than the two of us now that we have everyone being introduced to Elizabeth and Alex. And of course, there are all of you listening to us. You're part of this jamboree as well.
Welcome to the party.
No more teasing, no more potential spoilers. Let's get to our conversation that we had with Casey. There is a lot to learn in this conversation. We're so happy that Casey was able to be our first guest on our inaugural pod, and we hope that you all enjoy this conversation. All right, we want to welcome Casey Doherty to the podcast. Hi, Casey. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
We're so happy to have you as our very first guest for this podcast.
Yeah, thank you for the honor. I'm super excited to join you all.
You know, even though this is our first podcast, a lot of us in this community, we know each other, but we want to make sure that our listeners know a little bit more about you. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? And that could be whatever you're working on, what your day job is, what your 9 to 5, your 5 to 9, what are the things that you're working on? What about your life do you want to share to our listeners?
Yeah, my name is Casey Doherty. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a disabled activist and a disability studies scholar. And then my day job, I work as a policy analyst for the Disability Justice Initiative at the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C. And in that role, I work to promote policies that improve the lives of disabled people. And I'm particularly focused right now on reproductive healthcare access and access to democracy. So, looking at like the accessibility of voting. And then outside of work, I'm a PhD student in special education and disability studies at the University of Nevada, Reno. So that's like my after work fun fun thing, if you can call it that. But I'm in my first semester. I'm loving that. And then kind of when I have energy outside of those things, I organize with some groups like Generation Patient, the Chronic Disease Coalition, and ME Action, which are kind of like disability specific advocacy orgs. And my research is actually related to my work with one of those organizations, ME Action.
So it seems like disability advocacy shows up a lot in your life.
Yes, definitely.
So where did this advocacy start for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I definitely see disability advocacy popping up in every facet of my life. I am housebound due to my complex energy limiting post viral disabilities. And so, really, my disabilities impact everything I do, in good and bad and neutral ways. And so, I think a lot of how I think about disability advocacy is through my own lived experience, which, is common for folks, I think. Um, and kind of the way I think about it is like disability advocacy and disability justice activism isn't like a hobby for me. It's my way of life, my whole life. And it's where I've met my friends and where I learned like how to pace and try to conserve what energy I have, what crip time is, how to invest in mutual aid, and more. So I think really as I became disabled kind of in my later teens with chronic illnesses and energy limiting disabilities, that's really when I started to learn kind of about how disability advocacy was showing up in my own life in, help for my community members and things I was learning. And then I kind of figured out where I could contribute over the years. And I'm very grateful to be in the spaces that I'm in with the people that I'm in. Yeah.
Just want to add and ask you a little bit more about what you just said. You mentioned the language of crip time and you've mentioned a lot of disability community. And I'm wondering if there is any term you know as an insider that you wish other people did. We're collecting terms for Borg Diem and, we're thinking
Hmm.
about the third edition. So, what is a word? It can be crip time too, but is there a word or a concept, and it can be more than one, that you really wish people knew and understood from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And one that comes immediately to mind. I don't know if you all have heard of access intimacy as a term in the community.
Yes,
Mm.
yes, Mia Mingus,
Yeah,
yes.
me and Mingus. Yeah, I think that's probably my favorite one to talk about because it's actually something that my best friend and I, who she has similar disabilities to me, we talk about that a lot because I think it shows up a lot in our friendship, and so we can kind of talk about what it means. But access intimacy was coined, as Stephanie said, by activist and writer Mia Mingus, and it refers to the feeling where somebody just like innately gets your access needs, and you don't have to like consistently advocate for yourself and say what you need, but you can kind of like melt into the comfort of knowing that someone knows what you need and knows how you need them to show up. And that is such a comfort for me when I identify that in folks, because particularly for me, like everything I do is exhausting because of my disabilities. So, um,
Taxing
having
financially and time. Oh my
yeah,
God.
yeah. Well, and that's another term, disability tax. But it is exhausting to have to constantly say, this is what I need, and of course there's nothing wrong with and of course you should advocate for yourself, but when you can identify a person or a group of people who you have that access intimacy with, and it goes both ways, right? So, you know, hopefully in like a close relationship like I have with my best friend Courtney. Like I know how she needs me to show up and she knows how I need her to show up. And yeah, I think access intimacy is such an important part of my disability experience, and really like a major kind of connection to the broader disability community.
That's fantastic. And it's such, Mia Mingus as well as Alice Wong, just like folks that are
Mhm.
at the forefront of like redefining concepts that we don't always face.
Talking about those spaces and especially communities and lived experience, that's something that is at the heart of the Including Disability crew and the Including Disability Summit. How did you hear about Including Disability?
When I was in graduate school getting my master's in disability studies, I definitely tried to familiarize myself with kind of the landscape of disability studies journals. And I had hopes to one day publish. So I kept looking at journals that were accepting articles, and including disability really stood out to me because of, I think, its intersectional approach. And I noticed that you all accept submissions from, not just established scholars, but also students, activists, artists, allies, community members. And that really stood out to me because I think that is pretty unique. And I get the impression too, like that there's a real emphasis here on scholars and authors infusing their lived experience into their work. That is something that is very important to me and something that I certainly tried to do in my research. And I think that too, like stands out to me when I'm reading content. Like you can really tell if somebody's researching something that has affected them or, their loved ones or community members. And so I was really looking to be part of kind of that scholarly community.
So now that you're part of that community, what are some of the other things that you've been involved with that team and that community?
Yeah, I'm still kind of learning how I can best engage, and I'm really excited to kind of learn more about the summit next year. But I think the what I've been grateful for is being connected with Stephanie Cork, and who was very gracious in serving as my mentor in the publishing process. This is my first kind of scholarly article published. I've published some policy stuff in different spaces, but this is my first real like long form article, and I had no idea what the process was. So I was so grateful to be connected with Stephanie, who kind of guided me through that process.
Yeah, Stephanie has helped a lot of us in this community and kind of pushed us forward. So we're happy to have her as part of the team. I do want to ask you about the summit that is coming up for next year. But first, you did mention about that earlier mentorship and the editorial process. How was your experience through all of that?
I'm so grateful for the mentorship I received from Stephanie. Like I said, my first publication, I really had no idea what I was doing. All I knew was that I would, submit my paper and see what happened. And I'm so grateful because I specifically, submitted to including disability first. And then I was like, oh, people don't usually get published on their first try. Like I'll just wait and hear. And I was so grateful that the first time it worked out, but I definitely would not have been able to do it without Stephanie's guidance and mentorship and support. I think Stephanie made what I believe can be a tedious process in the publishing space into like a fun, exciting, and empowering experience for me. Stephanie's also really supported me in the first semester of my PhD program, helping me learn like what to expect and helping me to be excited about the future and other, papers that I'll publish and other ventures. Um, and I think too, like I don't know many people pursuing their doctorate, so this connection has been very meaningful to me, and I really look forward to opportunities for us to collaborate. And then something I've reflected on too is I hope once I'm more experienced, I can kind of circle back and provide that mentorship to others.
So I know we've talked a lot about, how you were able to choose including disability because of your knowledge. Was there a reason you picked kind of disability publications in particular? Was there a reason you picked open access? Was that important to you?
Yes, it was definitely important to me. In my work in disability policy, I feel like I'm constantly reading articles and scholarship, so much of which is behind a paywall. And
Right?
I
And you
think
have to
it's
pay
so
like
important.
$60 an article that doesn't go to the author. I mean, what?
Right, right. So I think it's so important that everyone can access accurate information about disability. Um, and especially like, disabled scholars put so much into their work. So, and you mentioned that most of the time they're not even getting the money for the articles. So I really think the public deserves, free access to it. And I think too, even going beyond free access, we can think about literal access. Stephanie and I had talked about we had discussions about how to kind of make my work most accessible to folks. So, there's the access of it being free, but also in discussing, how my research is about people with a severe energy limiting disability called ME, many of whom can't read or have the energy to read. I know when I first developed ME, I didn't have the ability to read for many months, and so Stephanie and I talked about how I could record myself reading my piece so folks could listen to the article in chunks instead. And so that access piece is also something that's very important to me.
And luckily, we also have this opportunity. We're using our favorite Zoom platform. We hope one day that maybe they'll sponsor us to do this kind of thing. But this is a great way for us to be able to get people remotely together to be able to do those audio recordings because we do have a wonderful team. So thank you. Yeah, open access is really important to us, and it means a lot. I think in a lot of different ways, and we continue to try to create formats that are more accessible. And we always
Mhm.
take critique, we always take ideas, and we continue to grow because like accountability is an act of love and it's so necessary in creating, that community. So thank you for that.
So, what are your hopes for your article, Reimagining Protest?
Yeah, I have a lot of hopes for it. And writing the piece meant a lot to me. And I can share first, if it's appropriate, a little bit about my research and then share what I'm hoping for in the future.
Oh, absolutely.
Uh,
Please.
yeah, I've long been interested in activism, which we know is a critical element of the disability rights movement. There's lots of images of, the Capitol crawl or, folks protesting and sit-ins for the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Those are such iconic pieces of the disability rights movement. And I think disabled activists and protesters have really paved the way for more accessible activism opportunities. But really, traditional forms of activism, where you think about, marching in the streets, like laying your body down on the line, they often exclude activists with, for example, severe energy limiting disabilities, such as a disability called myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is very long. It's also goes by ME, or folks may have heard of chronic fatigue syndrome. That's a disability that I have, and I learned just a lot about kind of the rich culture of the community, and also kind of learned about some of the bad things through my own experience, but also historically in the community. People with ME have been ignored and disbelieved for decades, by often first doctors and people in their life, but also the media, policymakers, funders. And they've been excluded from traditional forms of disability justice activism because, they may not be able, for example, I really can't walk very far. So, I can't really go out and march in the streets. Um, and so ME activists have had to adopt creative activism techniques to raise awareness and share their stories while adhering to their energy limits. We face something called post-exertional malaise. So it's not just like tired, it's actually like a cellular fatigue. If the way I like try to describe it is, if folks remember learning about like mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell, when we were like in high school, um, folks with ME like I have, that is going wrong. So basically, you just can't generate energy, and like sleep does not help. So you have to be so extremely careful not to go outside of, your energy limits. And that's a very hard like thing to figure out where your energy limits lie.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's very tough. And so kind of circling back to my research, my paper seeks to explain how artivism, which is the intersection of art and activism, kind of a made up word, but also kind of not. Yeah. So my research seeks to explain how artivism provides a unique way for people with severe ME to participate in protests and movements from their homes or beds. Um, and kind of what inspired me to look at exactly what I looked at in this research, an ME advocacy organization that I work with, ME Action. They post a severe ME artists gallery each summer in honor of Severe ME Day, where folks with severe ME can submit kind of any sort of artwork. So, paintings, sculptures, there was some embroidery, poetry, other written stuff, video, anything. And so I took that gallery and analyzed a random sample of artwork by people with severe ME. And then I shared common themes that the artists conveyed, what they were trying to say about their experience or the community, and also I was explaining kind of what ME is, but just for context, people with severe ME are housebound or bedbound, typically need to use a wheelchair. They're unable to work or attend school, and are often unable to complete like basic self care activities independently. So I fall on like the mild to moderate scale where I am still very limited, but very grateful to be able to attend school virtually, for example. And it's a very serious disability, one that most people don't know exists, even though it can happen to you like after an illness. Um, and it's wild that first of all, most American medical schools do not teach it. Um, and medical providers so often do not believe us when we describe the symptoms that we have. There's no biomarker. So that makes it very difficult to diagnose. And also there's no treatment or cure. And so with my article, sorry, this is getting long-winded.
No, no,
Uh,
this is good. This is a lot of information, of course, but I don't know if a lot of people are really focusing on what this is, especially, at the level of a definition. They
yeah,
see
yeah.
they see a lot of long words and oh
Mhm.
yeah, I might know what one symptom is or the other, but they're not
Yep.
really focusing on how this actually affects real people. So
Yeah.
this is really important for people listening in and for us here at the crew. This is great information.
Yeah, thank you. Um, well, yeah, so the goals of my research and article were to shine light on the experiences of people with severe ME who are so often kind of pushed aside, explain inclusive activism techniques that folks can adopt in their movements, and then also call for further awareness of and research on ME. Um, I learned quickly after joining this community that there's such a rich culture of accessible activism in the ME community, and that's really what I wanted to highlight. So I mentioned I identified five main themes from a sample of the gallery, and those themes were lack of freedom, the anthropomorphism of ME, which is like making it, like have human characteristics,
Right.
invisibility, anger, and fear. So those themes really speak to the challenges of living with severe ME in a society that ignores, disbelieves, and like even kind of maligns folks with that disability. Um, and so I really want my article to inspire others to research the ME community. There definitely is like medical research some into the community. It often is not helpful because it'll look at things like exercise, which is actually contraindicated for folks in our community. But there's almost no research on like the social aspect of the community. So looking at like the culture, for example.
Right.
Um, and so I really want to show that this is like a historically underrepresented group in disability studies and other fields. And it's one that there is so much to say about. And I think people, like the public, would be shocked if we actually did kind of shine light on the mistreatment of folks with this disability. And one thing I like to share with people, kind of the ME activist slogan is called Millions Missing, and it refers to how millions of people globally are pushed from daily life and missing from like research, funding, policy, work, school, and just their lives. And I just have mild to moderate ME, but I am pretty much fully housebound. I'm really not able to see people. The only way I'm able to work and do school is because I do nothing else. I really I see like one friend, not to make it like too depressing, but like you have to be
Right,
so
but this is reality
careful.
of what
Yep.
this is. I mean, we often talk about the spoon theory,
Mhm.
and we
Mhm.
start with a number of spoons, but as I listen to the story, those with ME, even mild to moderate, are starting with far less spoons than what the theory
Mhm.
would suggest.
Yes. Yes.
So,
And actually, yeah, thank you for bringing up spoon theory. I think that's a really helpful kind of picture to paint for folks. And I actually recently heard there's kind of a spin-off from spoon theory. It's called like the matchstick theory, where instead of thinking about it as spoons, you're thinking about it as a match because most people with chronic illness, like it's not that like you're putting your spoons in the dishwasher or whatever. It's
right,
literally that your match is being lit. You can't relight that match. Like you can reuse a spoon,
right,
but you
yes,
can't use a match. So
yeah, and
I
it's
think
real
that
energy. I mean, it depicts
yeah.
real energy, right? So,
And I think that that's like a good way to show what I had mentioned a few minutes ago, post-exertional malaise, that you can't it, like, actually damages your body to do too much. So you can't sleep that off and then wake up the next day and bounce back. And I think that many disabilities that you can't see, people don't believe. And so, I've definitely experienced that. And I think too, something that it's important for listeners to hear is that this research is only going to get more important as the COVID-19 pandemic continues. Several studies estimate that half of patients with long COVID fulfill ME criteria. So we're seeing folks that, maybe never had any history of chronic illness or disability, suddenly unable to get out of bed, unable to read or write or maybe speak, can't brush their teeth anymore, and this is what's happening to their bodies. So, you know, it's not meant to really scare anyone, but we know that disability is the only identity group that you can join at any time. So I think it's just important for folks to be aware um, of these different disability communities, but also, that there are very strong community ties within them. And that's also kind of what I tried to look into with my research. So circling back to what do I hope for in the future with this piece, like I said, I really hope that this piece shows scholars and just members of the public that this is a community that has been under researched and there's a lot of potential to do a lot of good in raising awareness and sharing the stories of this community. I think it's also critical that disabled people, particularly people with lived experience of ME, lead this research going forward. I plan to continue, my small little piece of research. I had analyzed for this piece the 2023 Severe ME Artist Gallery, and there's a more recent 2024 one that they're released every kind of end of July, early August. And you can view the most recent artwork at www.meartistsproject.com. Um, and so I really just hope this research can create new opportunities for disability studies scholarship to center historically missing voices, and not only missing, but folks that literally have been pushed out of the narrative on any sort of disability activism because they are in their homes or in their beds. And it goes back to the slogan of millions missing, right? Like we
right.
are literally pushed away. And I think the pandemic continues to show that. Like even if one day I had enough energy to go somewhere, I really can't risk going somewhere, that I could potentially pick something up. So yeah, that was a long-winded way of
Yeah.
saying that I think there's a lot of potential here to do more.
Absolutely, because I think focusing on something maybe, let's call it niche, like ME, this might, be the spark for those other millions missing,
Mhm,
under another diagnosis that
mhm.
need that visibility and that support. So, there's obviously a lot of work ahead for this community to make this information common knowledge. So I'm wondering if you plan on being part of our event next year for the Including Disability Global Summit in 2025 in April.
Yeah, I definitely hope to be a part of it. I absolutely plan to submit a presentation proposal. and would love to kind of share this to a wider audience. And I want to say too, like I am so encouraged by the accessibility of the summit. I know that y'all's like mottos, what is it, online for now, forever.
Right,
That
right.
really stands out to me. Like as I mean, as a person who really needs that access, so many academic conferences and summits, require travel and like it's this big thing. And not only is that financially not feasible for a lot of folks, but it's not from an accessibility standpoint either. So that really ties back to a lot of the things I said about why I identified including disability as a journal I wanted to collaborate with in the beginning, because I think that you really need to, show in your actions, like what you believe rather than, I don't know. I just don't think it's meaningful to publish disability studies scholarship if you're not also like investing in the community and
Right.
making it accessible.
Yeah, don't just put it out in the universe.
Yeah, right.
That's step one, right? Or
Yes.
or it's an early step, and that's what we're trying to do with the summit. Is while the internet is written in ink, and our
Mhm.
availability to be fully accessible, growing from 2 or 3 countries in our early days to over 20 countries in terms of our
Mm,
reach. The whole idea is yes, we're putting this information into the universe, but then we're also acting on that, and keeping it there for the next person to find it, and then
right.
they can be actionable as well. So
Mhm.
that's the idea.
Yeah, that's great.
This has been a great conversation, Casey. Thank you so much for joining us on what is our inaugural episode of the podcast. We are so ecstatic that we can kick off this journey for our listeners with you alongside. Hope that you'll come back sometime.
Yes, I absolutely would love to do that. And thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us.